What is going on, everybody? Today we've got ourselves another mock draft here for the 2021 NFL Draft. The big night is only 2 days away. We are almost there, and today's mock draft is a little bit different. All of my mock drafts this season have been me trying to predict what I think will happen with all the picks, but in today's mock draft, I will be stepping into the shoes of the teams and making the picks based on my own personal evaluations of the players. So I think there's going to be a lot of disagreements from people in the comments because we all share different opinions. That's the great thing about draft season. We all rank and view players differently. So I may have the pick to your team that you may not like. I may have the pick to your team that you really like. Just know that none of this has to do with what teams are going to do in real life. Rather, what I think they should do come Thursday night and the rest of the weekend. So, obviously, with the draft coming right up, I still have a lot of stuff I want to do. Yesterday was my 7-round mock draft where I predicted the picks. Tomorrow, I will be releasing my full big board, and this video is pretty much like a predecessor to that, since a lot of this, again, is based on my own personal evaluations and rankings of the players. And then on Thursday, the night of the draft, I will be doing a 1-round mock with trades. And then Sunday, I will be releasing my full draft grade. So, still a lot of draft content coming out these next few days. Hope you guys are ready and excited. Let's get into a mock draft. Let's start here at the top of the draft at pick 1. This is an easy one. I think Trevor Lawrence is the best quarterback in this draft, and the Jags should pick him. One of the few selections that I may agree with in real life. On to pick 2, again, another pick that seems to be the consensus around the mock draft community that I agree with, being Zach Wilson going to the New York Jets. Not a whole lot to talk about those top 2 picks. I have Trevor Lawrence as my QB1 and Zach Wilson as my QB2. So now we get to 3 where things get interesting, and obviously it really seems like this pick will be between Mac Jones and Trey Lance. I think there's a higher chance it will be Justin Fields than people think. I actually had Justin Fields going here in my 7-round mock yesterday. I'm not as convinced that's going to happen, but I think that's what the Niners should do, because I think Justin Fields is the best quarterback currently on the board by a pretty considerable margin. The Justin Fields slander in the draft community has been absurd, and it needs to stop now. I think he is a perfect fit here in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan's going to love working with him, and I think Justin Fields is going to prosper into a phenomenal quarterback if he goes to the Niners. Pick 4. This was an interesting one. I've always been on the boat that Atlanta should pick a quarterback here, especially if Justin Fields falls. But in this scenario, Fields does not fall. So that leaves us with a tough decision. Do I go with one of the quarterbacks, or do I go with the best non-QB in the draft? And I think the value here is fine for Trey Lance. So that's why I will have Lance being the pick. He's not going to be that high on my board because my board does not have to do with positional value, so Trey Lance might be in like the 20s, but I don't think this is bad value because he is a quarterback. So at 5, the Bengals get their pick of any non-QB in this draft, and this was a tough one. I considered Kyle Pitts, Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, but I do have this pick being Chase. I understand that the Bengals do need help on the offensive line. That's no secret, but Penei Sewell will not fix their offensive line. If you can get a dynamic playmaker like Jamar Chase, then I think that will give this offense a ton of more opportunities. And this is a deep O-line class. There are a bunch of guys who you could pick in the 2nd or 3rd round. So I don't think Cincinnati has to pick Sewell here, although, again, I do think that'd be a fine pick. Not something they need to do. At pick 6, another potential Penei Sewell landing spot. And this one, again, was a really challenging one, especially with trading away Eric Flowers today. The Dolphins could move Robert Hunt over to guard, draft Penei Sewell, and plug him in at right tackle. I think that would make a lot of sense. Or have Sewell at left tackle and move Austin Jackson to the right side. I think either one of those scenarios would be good. But Kyle Pitts is a once-in-a-generation type of prospect. I'm not saying he's the most talented specimen to enter the NFL in the past 10 years, but he's definitely one of, and there hasn't been a guy who's really ever entered the NFL like Kyle Pitts. He's that unique. And again, kind of like Jamar Chase, the Dolphins will have opportunities to get good offensive linemen, but they're not going to have opportunities to get a guy like Kyle Pitts. I understand the offensive linemen in the 2nd round are nowhere near as good as Penei Sewell, but you're not getting a player close to the talent of Kyle Pitts in the second round. So that's why I'm doing this for the Dolphins. For the Lions at 7, I think you have to pick the best non-QB here. A quarterback would be fine if Fields or Lance falls, but neither of them do. And I don't think the Lions have to pick a quarterback right now. I think at this stage of your rebuild, you have to see if Jared Goff is the guy or not, and you have to surround him with help. I think if Penei Sewell was picked at 5 or 6, you pick whoever is available out of Ja'Marr Chase or Kyle Pitts. I understand that the Lions have TJ Hockenson, but if Kyle Pitts is on the board, you pick him and you pair those two up. That would be an incredibly nasty duo. But since Kyle Pitts and Ja'Marr Chase are not off the board, this is a fairly easy pick for me. The right side of the Lions' offensive line really isn't shored up, so I think Penei Sewell would be a fine pick. And then Panthers at 8. I have them getting Patrick Surtain the second. I have him as my top-graded defensive player. I believe he's 5th on my overall board. I know a lot of mock drafts have had Rashawn Slater here. I think that'd be a fine pick. But personally, I think the value is better with Surtain than it is with Slater. And again, it is a deep offensive line class. You can still go that route in the second round. So the top 8 picks really would not be a surprise if that unfolded at draft night. But now we're starting to get some surprises. Starting at 9, I have the Broncos picking Christian Darrisaw. I understand that the Broncos are probably going to be in the quarterback market, but since there are no trades in this mock draft, and since none of the top 4 quarterbacks fall to 9, I don't think they should go that route. I thought about possibly looking at other positions, maybe a corner, maybe a linebacker. I really considered Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah here, but I decided to go with Darrisaw instead. I do have Christian Darrisaw graded higher than Rashawn Slater, and it's not that I'm low on Slater. I think he's a fine prospect, but I'm very high on Christian Darrisaw. I think he's really, really good, and he's been one of the more underrated first-rounders in this year's draft class, and I believe he is a top 10 talent. The Broncos don't desperately need tackle. They have Garrett Bowles, and they have Ja'Wuan James. Neither of those guys are phenomenal. They did just extend Garrett Bowles not too long ago. His career started off rocky, but he is playing a lot better. But he's not getting any younger. He was like 25 when they picked him. He's probably around 28 or 29 at this point. Ja'Wuan James as well, not getting any younger, plus the medical question mark. So I think offensive tackle is a bigger need for this team than people think. Jaycee Horn at 10 to the Dallas Cowboys. They need a starting caliber corner really, really badly. And although there were some better value picks, such as Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, they don't need to pick a wide receiver. I prefer value over need, but when you absolutely don't need a receiver, that doesn't make sense. So Jaycee Horn, next best option, I think, value-wise. This isn't a total reach, and obviously it fills a major need. Giants at 11 with great value, getting Jalen Waddle. He's my wide receiver too. I think I have him 6th on my board. So getting him at 11, this is really, really strong value. And then Devontae Smith at 12. I don't remember exactly where he is on my board. I know he's in the top 10 somewhere. So again, kind of like Jalen Waddle, value, and it happens to fit a need. So good work for the Eagles. Rashawn Slater falls into the Chargers' laps. They have to run this card up to the podium. Although I think Christian Darrisaw is better, I still think Rashawn Slater is a really good prospect. Nonetheless, I just don't think he has the same upside to be an elite left tackle like Christian Darrisaw. I think Slater's versatility helps him move around the offensive line. I think that gives him a higher floor, but I don't think he has the chance to be an elite tackle, whereas with Sewell and Darrisaw, I think the two of them do. But this is a great, great pick for the Chargers. Vikings at 14. I really didn't know what to do here because if Darrisaw or Rashawn Slater falls, I think they'd both be great choices, but they are off the board. Jaycee Horn is also off the board. He would have made sense. So there were a few options I thought of. I could have gone with an edge rusher here. I decided not to. Instead, I went for Caleb Farley. Farley is my CB4. I do have Greg Newsome ahead of him because of the medical concerns. If not for the medical, Farley would probably be either corner number 1 or corner number 2 on my board, but instead he is CB4. But I still think he's really, really good. It might be a little bit early, again, considering the medical, but there aren't really a ton of great options here for the Vikings at 14. So why not possibly make a swing for the fences? They've used a lot of high picks on corners lately, and although they've gotten some solid players, they haven't gotten anyone great. So I think possibly taking a big swing for Farley might be a solid option. The Patriots at 15, I thought about Mac Jones here. I really did. but I decided not to. Instead, we're going to go Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, linebacker out of Notre Dame. I don't think Mac Jones would be a bad pick here, but I really like JOK. I think I have him graded as my second highest defensive player in the entire draft, only behind Patrick Surtain. So I am really, really high on JOK. I think this is excellent value. And then Cardinals at 16, few different routes they could go with, but Greg Newsome II is really solid value. I really like Newsome. Breakout season this year at Northwestern, has the size, has the length, has the athleticism. He has some medical question marks as well, although not as severe as, say, a Caleb Farley. So I think this would be a great pick for the Cardinals. The Raiders at 17 is another spot that I really didn't know what to do with, but I settled on Micah Parsons, the linebacker out of Penn State. Most people have Parsons as their LB1. I have him 2 behind Owusu-Koramoah. I still think Micah Parsons is really solid. He does have his concerns, but he's super talented, super athletic. I think it would be hard for the Raiders to pass him up, and in this scenario, I don't think there is any better choice for them. Dolphins at 18 go Jaelan Phillips, edge rusher out of Miami. This is kind of like Caleb Farley. The Dolphins are taking a swing for the fences here. Jaelan Phillips is a phenomenal player. Obviously, he has the medical stuff, and you could go for a safer route, possibly like a Kwity Paye here. You could always look at the offensive line, maybe a Tevin Jenkins or Elijah Vera Tucker. Hell, if you want to add another receiver, that would work too, but I don't think they want to use both of their first-round picks on playmakers, and I'm confident enough in some of the guys they already have on the roster, like Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and for this year, Will Fuller, to where I don't think you have to pick a guy like Rashad Bateman, even if it's slightly better value. So because of that, I'm going to pick Phillips here. Speaking of Rashad Bateman, he goes 19 to the Washington football team. This is great value. I think he's like 13th on my board. So really, really good selection, but there just are not a ton of teams in the teens outside of probably past the Eagles and the Chargers. I don't think there's anyone really past them who makes a lot of sense for Rashad Bateman, which is why I didn't have him going to any of those teams. But Washington's going to run this card up to the podium. Wide receiver's not their biggest need, but the value would be too much for me to pass up, so that's why I gave them Bateman. Terrace Marshall Jr., wide receiver, LSU to the Bears. I really like Terrace Marshall Jr. I think you could go offensive line here. You could consider Mac Jones with this pick or the last pick, but again, I'm not going to do that. I don't think Mac Jones would be a bad pick at 19 or 20, but I think the value for these two receivers is going to be too much to pass up. Colts at 21, I really thought about offensive line. I thought about Tevin Jenkins, but he was a right tackle at Oklahoma State. It's not easy to transition over to the left side, which is what the Colts really need. So we're going to pick Kwity Paye instead. I think this is strong value. I think the Colts want to add more pieces to the front of their defensive line. Tevin Jenkins does not have to wait a whole lot longer, though. He goes 22 to the Tennessee Titans. Wide receiver and corner are both positions they could really look at, but the wide receivers and corners I really like are gone. And after this next group, guys like Newsome, Bateman, and Marshall, there is a little bit of a dip at those positions. They do need right tackle a lot as well. Tevin Jenkins is a tiny bit of a reach here in my opinion. I think I had him in the late 20s, so not terrible value by any stretch of the imagination, and it definitely fills up a need. Azeez Ojulari, edge rusher, Georgia to the Jets. I really like Azeez Ojulari. I think he'd be a solid fit here. I do have my concerns about Ojulari, but I really like the upside that he brings to the table. I think this would be a fine pick. And then Steelers at 24, I really thought about Najee Harris here. I know there are some people who are hell-bent about not picking a running back in the first round, although I don't believe in using high draft picks on a running back. If you're really in a situation where you're a running back away, then you go ahead and get that running back. But the problem is the Steelers are not a running back away. They need more than just Najee Harris. He will not push them over the edge. They need a lot of help on the offensive line, and I really like Creed Humphrey. So this is your Marquise Pouncey replacement for the next decade, pretty much. Elijah Vera Tucker going to the Jaguars at 25. I'm not as high on Vera Tucker as others, although I do think this is strong value. The Jaguars can try him out at tackle first, and if it doesn't work out, you can always slide him over to guard, so that positional flexibility could prove to be helpful. Levi Onwuzurike, interior defensive lineman out of Washington, going to the Browns. I do have him ranked over Christian Barmore. I have him and Barmore pretty much even, so if the Browns pick Barmore over Onwuzurike, I would not call it a bad pick. But I do think Onwuzurike is slightly the better prospect. I do really like him. Elijah Moore to the Ravens at 27. Now, Moore is not my highest rated receiver on the board. That is actually Nico Collins. But I have Moore being the pick here instead because I think the Ravens, if they do go receiver, I think they need to look for someone who's more reliable and more NFL ready. Elijah Moore has a really, really high floor, and I think you need a reliable safety option in this offense because the Ravens have swung for the fences on a lot of their recent receiver picks. Those haven't totally worked out, so I think you need to go for a safer pick here in Elijah Moore, even if it's a tad bit of a reach in my opinion. I think most people would consider this good value. I think based on my board, this is a little bit high for him, but obviously since I'm making this pick, it's a good one. Asante Samuel Jr., cornerback, Florida State to the Saints. The Saints CB room is looking pretty dire at the moment. I could see them possibly trying to be aggressive, maybe move up for one of the top 4 guys, but obviously with no trades here, they will gladly take Asante Samuel Jr. as well, who I think is a really, really good prospect. Packers at 29 were in an interesting spot. I thought about a few positions. Again, I thought about wide receiver, but I think it is a little bit too early for the Nico Collins and the Miami Browns of the world. Kadarius Toney as well I thought about, but I still think it's too early for him. Offensive line would have worked, but with Elijah Vera Tucker gone, I don't think there are any interior guys worth picking here in the first round. Corner as well would have made a lot of sense. Asante Samuel Jr. would have been a great pick. But again, I think there's too much of a drop-off in value at corner. They also need linebacker, and I think the value does match up a lot better there with Jamin Davis and Zaven Collins on the board. I have Davis just a tad higher than Zaven Collins, but those two guys are pretty much interchangeable for me. Bills at 30. This was another tough pick. There wasn't a clear and obvious one for me. I really thought about a running back here, specifically Najee Harris, but I decided not to. I picked Gregory Rousseau instead. I think I'm a tad bit higher on Rousseau than most. I do see the concerns, but I also see the upside with this kid. And this is kind of like the DK Metcalf hate. DK Metcalf was very athletic. He did test poorly in his free cone and had medical stuff. Gregory Rousseau doesn't even have the medical issues. DK slipped to 64. I think I had him 6th on my board. Seattle ended up picking him, which I viewed as a steal at the time, and looking at it in hindsight, it definitely was. Now, Gregory Rousseau is not 6th on my board. I believe he's in the 30s somewhere. But after those top 3 edge rushers, my next highest guy is Gregory Rousseau. So I think if the Bills want to make a tough pick, maybe swing for the fences a little bit, why not get a guy like Gregory Rousseau here in the back end of the first round? Trevon Moehrig, safety TC to the Ravens. I do think Moehrig is worthy of a late first-round selection. Ravens could use more help in the back end of that secondary. I would pick Sam Cosmi here, but I do think that it seems like they are going to sign a tackle in free agency, and that's what I would try to do here as well if I were them, rather than pick a rookie. And then Najee Harris to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 32. I mean, man, this draft board worked out really well for them. They get their choice of the running backs. The Bucs are in a win-now position. This is a team who's trying to win a Super Bowl. So rather than picking a project, why not get a guy who has a chance to be an elite running back very early in his NFL career? And running back is a position that this team needs to address. So, great selection for the Buccaneers. Now on to round 2, I have the Jags getting Christian Barmore at 33. I'm not as high on Barmore as others. I do think he will be a first-round pick. And if he does go in the back end of the first round, I wouldn't really call it a reach. I still think he's a pretty good player. Travis Etienne to the Jets. I understand the Jets are a bad team picking a running back, but I think the Jets can compete for a playoff spot fairly early on as long as Zach Wilson is the guy we think he is. The Jets don't really have a reliable running back, not only as a runner, but also in the passing game. And I think Travis Etienne could be a big get and a big safety weapon for a guy like Zach Wilson. Javon Holland at 35, the defensive back out of Oregon. He's a really versatile guy, which is why I really like this pick for the Falcons. They need a lot of help at safety, and they could also maybe look to add another corner. Holland is primarily a safety, but he does have the versatility to play as the nickel corner, so I think value-wise this is really solid. Javonte Williams to the Dolphins. I really thought about Zaven Collins here, but the Dolphins need running back badly, and if the Dolphins want to compete as one of the top teams in the AFC next year, Myles Gaskin can't be your leading rusher, and that's no disrespect to Myles Gaskin. He's a fine player, but with Javonte Williams on the board, I think you choose him here. After Javonte Williams, there's a really big gap, in my opinion, at running back, and there's probably not anyone else of position worthy of being chosen with a second-round pick. after Williams. So that's why I had this pick for the Dolphins. Speaking of Zaven Collins, he won't have to wait too much longer. He goes to the Eagles at 37. I understand the Eagles don't value linebackers super highly, but I'm the GM here, not Howie Roseman. So that's why I have Collins being the pick here. Sam Cosmi to the Bengals. This is great value. I thought about him at a few spots. I thought about him to Jacksonville at 25 and 33. I thought about him to Baltimore. Thought about him to a few places, but he falls here. Bengals will gladly scoop him up. Wyatt Davis, guard, Ohio State to the Panthers. Wyatt Davis is really good when healthy. The medical concerns are definitely there, but I think the gap between him and Elijah Vera Tucker are smaller than people think. And because of that, I think this is really solid value. If Wyatt Davis can stay healthy, this will be a great pick. Denver at 40. I really thought about Mac Jones here, but I decided not to. And I think in this scenario, I know I said I'm not having any trades, but I am going to kind of break my own rule a little bit. Teddy Bridgewater for like a third-round pick. That makes a lot of sense for both teams. You get competition in for Drew Lock, and you get a reliable fringe starting quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater. And for the Panthers, they don't need Teddy Bridgewater. So I understand I'm kind of breaking my own rule here, but I would rather Jabril Cox and Teddy Bridgewater than Mac Jones and, say, some random third-round pick. I really like Jabril Cox a lot. He's a great cover linebacker. I think he'd fit really well with this defense, and I think he'd be a great pick. Detroit at 41, I have them going with Nico Collins. I think a lot of people are going to view this as a reach, but I really like Nico Collins a lot. I have him as my wide receiver 6. I have him graded higher than guys like Elijah Moore, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, players like that, which a lot of people would not agree with me. But I think Nico Collins has a really high ceiling. There are some question marks about him, but I really like what he brings to the table as a big, tall, thick receiver who can make big plays, who can be a jump ball threat. He performed well at the Senior Bowl after opting out for the 2020 season, and as a Lions fan, I'd be pretty happy with this pick, although I think most would be skeptical. Paulson Adebo, another opt-out player going to the Giants. Paulson Adebo looked like a first-rounder entering draft season last year, but he stayed in school. And with him opting out, it seems like he's kind of fallen off people's radar, but I still think he's really good. I've been high on him for a while. Ronnie Perkins, edge rusher, Oklahoma to the 49ers. I think this is around the range where the next batch of edge rushers go off the board. I think you have the clear top 3, in my opinion, in some order of Jalen Phillips, Azeez Ojulari, and Kwity Paye. Those guys are 1, 2, and 3 interchangeably. Then after that, there's a gap, and then there's that next group. I know I had Gregory Rousseau going earlier, but I think Rousseau kind of starts off that next tier, and then I think you have guys like Ronnie Perkins, Joe Tryon, Jason Owe, Joseph Osai, players like that, Peyton Turner. So I think this will be a solid pick here for San Francisco. Milton Williams, interior defensive lineman out of Louisiana Tech, going to the Dallas Cowboys. I really like Milton Williams. I think he's quite good. Athletically, he is a freak of nature. I could see him going a lot earlier than people expect, and I think at this stage in the draft, it would be really hard for Dallas to pass him up. Pat Freiermuth, tight end out of Penn State to the Jags. I originally had this pick penciled in as Kadarius Toney, but I changed it to Freiermuth because I think the Jaguars would rather get a safety valve for Trevor Lawrence, especially when they have another gadgety type player in Laviska Shenault. The Mac Jones fall finally comes to an end. Let me just make something clear. If Mac Jones goes in the first round, it's not a reach unless the Niners pick him at 3. I don't think San Francisco should do that. Let's say New England moves up to like 7 and the first 4 quarterbacks are off the board. I don't think that would be a reach, but the problem is outside of New England, Washington, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, there really aren't any teams who I really think should pick a quarterback who I didn't already give one to in this draft class. And for New England, Washington, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, I just thought they were better picks for them off the board. If any of those guys picked Mac Jones, I think that'd be fair value. But after Pittsburgh at 24, there's really nobody else who needs to pick a quarterback up until here. So that's why Mac Jones fell. The only spot I really thought about him was Denver at 40. But again, I would rather Jabril Cox and Teddy Bridgewater than Mac Jones in a third-round pick. Although it is close, you could go either way there. So value-wise, this is a great pick for New England. I think Jones is in the 30s on my board. He's my QB 5. Eric Stokes, cornerback, Georgia to the Chargers. I think this is right around what this next tier of corners is. Guys like Tyson Campbell, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Elijah Molden, guys like that. Stokes tips off that group. Will be a Charger. And then Dylan Raduns, again, this is now the next tier of offensive linemen. Guys like Liam Eichenberg, Alex Leatherwood, Landon Dickerson, guys like that. I think Eichenberg is probably my highest rated offensive lineman on the board, but if Raiders need a right tackle, Liam Eichenberg really only has experience at left tackle. I think Dylan Raduns has more versatility, and I don't think the gap between Eichenberg and Raduns is all that big, which is why I can justify him going to the Raiders here. This is a very interesting pick here. Kadarius Toney to the Arizona Cardinals. It was just too hard for me to pass this up. The Cardinals have a lot of names in their receiving core, but they don't have a lot of guys who I'm confident in for next year. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is arguably the best of the position. Christian Kirk is fine, but really outside of that, there aren't a ton of guys I'm super confident in. So if you can get a guy like Kadarius Toney, who is an absolute weapon with the ball in his hands, I think this would be outstanding value. I'm not as high on Kadarius Toney as others. I wouldn't use a first-round pick on him, but I think this is great value here in the middle of the second round. Landon Dickerson, center, Alabama to the Miami Dolphins. There are medical question marks with Dickerson, but he's a high-character player. He's a good leader, and he had a great season this year at Alabama before tearing his ACL. The Dolphins do need help at center, and I think this would be a good pick. Here's Liam Eichenberg. He goes at 51 to the Washington football team. Plug him right in at left tackle. He's your day one starter, really high-floored player. Tyson Campbell, cornerback Georgia to the Bears. They appear to have gotten a nice hit last year in Jalen Johnson, the corner out of Utah, a guy who I really liked. So adding another talented corner here in Campbell, I think makes a lot of sense, especially with Kyle Fuller out the door. Dyami Brown, wide receiver, North Carolina, the Titans. This is a steal. I think I have him in the early 40s on my board. So value-wise, this is a great pick. Again, there just wasn't really a great opportunity for a receiver to go off the board after Nico Collins, except for Kadarius Toney. I do have Brown higher on my board than Toney, but I think Kadarius Toney made more sense for Arizona. You know who's not going to complain about this? The Tennessee Titans, because they are getting great value here in Brown. Alex Leatherwood, offensive lineman, Alabama, to the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts pretty much have no left tackle next year. There is questions if Alex Leatherwood can be a starting tackle in the NFL. I think you at least have to try it out, see if he can. If not, you can always move him over to guard. But I think Alex Leatherwood could be a serviceable tackle in the NFL, even with smaller arms. Elijah Molden, cornerback, Washington to the Steelers. I do have Ifeatu Melifonwu graded higher than Molden, but I think Elijah Molden makes a lot of sense here to the Steelers. Really instinctive player. I think he has a high floor. Mike Hilton is gone. They need a new slot corner. And they could use an outside guy as well, which is where Melifonwu mainly is. But I think adding a versatile slot guy in Molden would be a great choice. And then Joe Tryon here at 56 to the Seahawks. I think this is really strong value. There wasn't really an offensive lineman I wanted to pick here. And edge rusher is also a massive need. So they're going to pick the local product in Tryon. I know there are some people who are higher on him than me. I think this is around where he should go, although I think he will go earlier. Final 8 picks of the day, starting at 57. This is an interesting one. Quinn Miners out of Wisconsin Whitewater to the Rams. Now, I do have a higher grade on the center out of Ohio State, Josh Myers, but the reason why I have Miners here is his versatility. I think he can play him at center and guard. Although I think Josh Myers is the better center, I don't think he has the positional flexibility that Miners has. And the Rams need a lot of help on the interior offensive line, so they can try out Miners at a few spots and see where he fits best. And I think the gap between Myers and Miners is small enough to where I can justify this. Nick Bolton, linebacker in Missouri to the Chiefs. I think Nick Bolton's an interesting prospect. I know people like him more than I do, but I do think he has nice potential. I think he's a little bit rough around the edges, but I think the Chiefs could develop him into something. Ifeatu Melifonwu, cornerback, Syracuse to the Browns, this is pretty good value. I have him as my CB9, and he ended up as the 10th corner off the board here, so value-wise, good choice. Jamar Johnson, another really good value pick here. Safety out of the Indiana, so the Saints doubling down on the secondary. They picked Asante Samuel Jr. with their first pick. I really like Jamar Johnson. I think he's a really versatile player. New Orleans can use him in a number of different ways. He has a knack for the football. He tormented Justin Fields in the Ohio State game, and I think this would be a nice choice for them. Rondale Moore to the Bills at 61. This was just too hard to pass up. I have Tylan Wallace and Amon-Ra St. Brown graded higher than him. I think I also have Amari Rodgers graded higher than Rondale Moore. I think most teams should pick any of those three guys before Rondale, but not the Bills, because I think Rondale Moore has a higher ceiling than all of them. Kind of like Kadarius Toney. Rondale Moore's a little bit more of a gadget guy. We don't really know what he can do as a surefire receiver, but when he has the ball in his hands, he's really hard to stop, and the Bills are really going all in. So if they can get a hit with one of these two picks and Rousseau or more, they can be legit Super Bowl contenders for the next few seasons. I understand that the Bills are taking two massive risks here with very high ceiling and low floor players, but if one of them pans out, then this is a great draft for them. Tylan Wallace to the Packers at 62. They need more playmakers. I think this is good value. Amon-Ra St. Brown to the Chiefs. Again, they need a little bit more juice at wide receiver. They have Tyreek Hill, who's great. They have Travis Kelce at tight end, who's great. So you're probably wondering, why would they need more weapons? Because after those guys, there's not a lot. Mecole Hardman I like, but he's inconsistent. Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle. I mean, it's just, Amon-Ra St. Brown would arguably be the second best receiver on this team right away, not including Travis Kelce. And then Jason Oweh at 64. The Bucs are the biggest winners of this draft, hands down. I'm not as high on Oweh as others. I think he's going to go sometime either in the first round or the early second round. I get that he's an athletic specimen with an insane ceiling, but I just think he's too raw to use a first-round pick on. And I usually like high-ceiling players, but with Oweh, I mean, he's literally just an athlete. He is super raw. So get him to Tampa where he doesn't have to make a gigantic impact early on. Let him develop and potentially have him in there in a few seasons when Jason Pierre-Paul is out the door. I think this would be an ideal landing spot for Oweh. I think the only way the Bucs get him is if he's available in the first round. But since I'm not as high on him, they'll get him here in the second. Hope you guys enjoyed, again, my what I would do mock draft. I understand people are going to have a lot of disagreements, but this is just my opinion. My board will be coming out tomorrow, so if you're excited for that, make sure to hit the like button. I'm out. Peace.